Hello and welcome to the Thursday Night Postgame Show, recapping Georgia State's 38-16 loss to the Memphis Tigers on Saturday. We're certainly back in your feeds earlier than usual. This is something we're looking to bring back. The timing of it might vary week to week as far as like maybe later in the day on Sunday, depending on travel or whatever. But we're aiming to get something up now, recapping the previous game before the start of the new week. Partially because I think it'll make the main podcast better. We talked for 40 plus minutes about the last game against Ole Miss, and judging by how I think this podcast is going to go, probably would have been more of the same when we were recapping Memphis this week. And so, especially as we get towards crossover season, I think it just makes sense that we need to have the 2 pods a week, just kind of let us fully get our thoughts out. This is before I've done my rewatch. I'm presuming that's the same for David because we're recording this early Sunday afternoon. And so there might be stuff that we do bring back up from the game on the next time we talk on the podcast. Kind of, just leave that up to each of our discretion if there's something that we want to revisit. But this should hopefully get the main thrust of our thoughts about the game, kind of hit a recap mode as well, run through some of the stats that sometimes we neglect just because we're trying to, cover it, but not dwell on it too much on the Thursday show. So with all that said, Georgia State, as I mentioned, loses this game 38-16. It was a 17-16 game at the half. Georgia State had actually, I think, edged the first half. If you look at the total stats, as I'm pulling those up now, Georgia State is outgained on the game 401 to 389. But if you switch over to looking at the first half and second half totals, it was a 313-192 edge in favor of the Panthers in the first half. So a disappointing that they did not have the halftime lead, and we'll get into specifically why it was not a 16-14 game as we go through the 3 phases. But in the second half, Memphis controlled the time of possession, just kind of sat on the defense, won in both the trenches, end up winning the second half by a margin of 21-0, getting a late pick 6 to kind of put an unfortunate capper on the game for Georgia State. But it was a bit of a surprise, or a bit of an open question heading into the game of who's going to be quarterback for Georgia State with the TJ Finley news. And he gets the starting nod. He completes his first 10 passes, looked incredibly crisp, gets hurt. But Cam Brown comes in after an inauspicious debut, let's say, against Ole Miss last week, and looks great. He ends up 8 of 12, 139 passing yards and 2 total touchdowns in his spell in this game. Finley takes back over in the second half, struggles. The offensive line struggled to hold up, and that was really the story as the Panthers only managed 76 yards of offense and, as I mentioned, 0 points in the second half as they just kind of played themselves out of this one. Memphis took over, and so 49 rushing yards certainly stands out. Even sack adjusted 85, so still not triple digits after we thought that was maybe going to be a strength of this team. A step back in that way this week. Ted Hurst back to his expected form. He has 97 yards receiving on 7 catches, and Javon Robinson continues to establish himself as the big play guy, the foil to Ted Hurst. He has 5 catches, 78 yards with a 44-yard touchdown. So that makes 2 straight weeks that he finds the end zone on a 40-plus yard pass play. After running through all those stats there, I'll turn it over to David for initial analysis, initial read on the game as Georgia State loses 38-16 in their home opener to Memphis.
Yeah, it was such a weird game, first of all. I think I'm not sure that Georgia State was playing poorly for a big majority of it, despite how close the score was. And I think the very frustrating thing is those 10 points for Memphis in the second quarter, if you can see. It really felt like those 10 points happened very close together. And that's not the case. There was a few drives in the second quarter between when they happened. But when you give up the field goal at the end of the first half on a play that should not have happened, it was supposed to be a 60-yard field goal. We'll talk about the penalties in a second. It's supposed to be a 60-yard field goal attempt. You get a false start. They reline up, kicker hits a 55-yarder, congrats, happy for you, whatever. And then immediately after that, Memphis comes out and scores 2 touchdowns in the second half. And it's like the game, the balloon, they always say the air is let out of the balloon, but it's not just that the air was let out of the balloon. It was deflated and stomped on. And then, somebody chucked a grenade on it or whatever, because that's really how it felt. Before the fourth quarter, I checked and Georgia State had like 24 second half yards. And it wasn't as bad as it felt just because there were 2 drives. And, yes, obviously that's not great, but like, over 2 drives, if you have 2 drives that you don't move the ball very well, like, okay, you might have, 24 yards there. Fine. But it's just the way that Memphis, took their 2 opening drives of the second half and Georgia State took their 2 opening drives of the second half. I mean, it was just rough, man. And especially because if you go to the comparison at the end of the first half, Georgia State was outgaining them by over 100. And I don't know that it felt like that was in baseball, we talk about peripherals, and all that stuff. And, sometimes guys' performances are not really supported by the data, especially when you have samples. It didn't feel like Georgia State was playing, over their skis all that much. I mean, yes, obviously, Finley came in, he started off very, well, and he, got hurt. I will let you speak to what the injury was because the broadcast could not identify what was wrong with him. And then I thought it was a hand injury, but he had the wrap on his bicep, which, I'm not a doctor or anything like that, so not sure, where specifically the pressure point was there. But, I'll be honest, when Brown came in, I was like, okay, they're just going to run the ball. This is not going to be a great half. He was killing it. He was doing a really good job, finding the open guy, making good decisions, not really putting the ball in harm's way. And they were able to move the ball after Finley went down. They moved it very successfully. And then they put Finley in at the end, when they came back in the third quarter, and just that was the ability to do that was gone. Not even just they struggled to do it, just the ability period to do that was gone. And it's frustrating because if you look at the final total for, the comparison, it looks like, okay, Georgia State just lost out on yards, penalty yards, and, penalties were about even. Obviously Georgia State threw a bunch more just because game situation dictated that. And, they had I
mean, it didn't really. We can get to that, but it was only a 3-score game in the final 11 seconds after the pick 6. So I think they got scared off of running the ball because it didn't go well. And look, early on, you give a goal-to-go situation or inside the 5. It's 3rd and 1 at the 3. You do a sneak. It doesn't work. You get 4th and 1. You hand off to Branson Robinson. No push. You get stuffed. And so I think they got, I don't want to say scared off, whatever phrasing you want to use. I think they decided they weren't getting enough push in the run game, and so they veered away from it. And it's something, I've got audio to run later from Dell McGee's press conference, but I think a decision was made to go away from the run, and I don't know that it was it's hard to argue it when you had plays like that, and I think that the offensive line did not have a good game, but I think they got themselves one-dimensional. I think they really got away from trying to run the ball, and it would have helped, especially, you're talking about the drives Memphis was able to put together, and it was near 19 minutes in the second half that Memphis possessed the ball. You needed to establish a run just to give your defense a break. I honestly don't have that many more worries about the defense in this game. One, they really only go 31 of those 38 points, and this is a Memphis team that the last team to beat them by scoring less than 30 points was in 2022. This is a team you have to win in a shootout. And so my baseline heading into this game was the defense needs to hold them within 30s and they're going to have a chance. That was mission accomplished. After the first play where they gave up a 50-yard pass they could have had a chance at a sack fumble, didn't get it, and the guy's wide open down the field. yes, you don't love the 5.1 yards a carry, and as the game went on especially, they really struggled to just get stops. And it was basically anytime Memphis needed some yards on the ground, they could get it. And Georgia State was the opposite. When they absolutely needed short yardage situation and run situations, they either couldn't get it or they just went away from it because they didn't trust they could get it. And so that's a concern. I guess as we're kind of like all over the place, I feel like we should center it around the quarterback thing. I think it's very clear watching the first half that there was no real reason to be concerned about TJ Finley because he looked crisp. And I don't know how many plays, I don't know how much of the playbook he has versus if they're still kind of centering on like a 30-40 that he really trusts. But he offered the best quarterback play we had seen to that point this season. And this is a guy who had...
I'm going to stop you just for a second. I know that it was cut short. It's been a while since Georgia State has seen quarterback play that good. And again, I don't want to, start putting his name up in the pantheon of good quarterback play in school history. I'm not going to do that. But like, if he is actually healthy, I feel like I have less questions about the quarterback room moving forward. And like, there's not a competition. And a thought that I had after like the first drive is, okay, the last like 3 weeks makes so much more sense now, just in terms of the quarterback and why the coaches have been the way that they were. This is what I said last week when I said I don't know what the coaches are doing. I have found my answer as to why the coaches were acting the way that they were, because I'm just operating under the assumption that like, all right, Finley is the guy, and quarterback is probably not going to be an area where we have questions this year if he can continue to play like he did.
Yeah, and the health is a concern going forward just because he did seem hobbled, let's say, in the second half. Was not the same. But the other part of it is Cameron Brown comes in, and, I wouldn't say I wrote him off after last week, but I was concerned the way it looked. It didn't seem like he was really going through progressions. It didn't look like they trusted him to throw the ball very much. And this week, I think it's fair to say that they were just kind of sandbagging. And we kind of thought that was the case, but I think this is confirmation because it was very clear that Cam Brown can throw the football down the field, because more than half of his 12 attempts this week were 10 or plus yards, 10 or more yards. 136 yards on those passes. I think it was 5 of 7, and one of those was the touchdown to Javon Robinson. He looked great, and the factor that going forward makes me think, because of TJ's health and because of the way the line looked, there's a chance he might be the better person to play quarterback because he's mobile. And you saw some run from TJ, but he didn't look comfortable escaping the pressure. Cam Brown was able to use that to an advantage. And the play that really comes to mind on that is the touchdown run, 22 yards to give them the 9-7 lead. Memphis was in man and just didn't have a body for him. So once he escaped the pressure, he had wide open spaces. And frankly, you saw that on the other side too. Brendan Lewis got free with his 68 rushing yards. There was at least one or two times where Georgia State was in man, blitzing, pressure didn't get there, and he had acres of space to run into. But Cameron Brown offers you that. And so if you're worried about the offensive line past this game, and maybe there's a piece of this that Memphis just has a good defense in front and played really well, and if TJ's healthy, maybe he's the guy. But certainly it's got to it piques your interest. The last thing I want to say about it, it's going to get meticulously picked apart as far as the decision to stick with Finley all through the second half. I think at the very least when it was 31-16 late, might have been worth giving Cameron Brown another run. But here's what I will say is a positive. They picked a guy. I think the worst thing they could have done is like go series by series and flip it up. I mean, if you follow me on Twitter, or been watching me comment on Sunbelt games recently, like I think JMU flat gave up a chance of winning the game at Louisville on Friday because they just kept going back and forth, even within the same series between their quarterbacks. And so I liked that they said, all right, we are going to, like, TJ has been cleared, he's going to be back. And to answer what you were saying, upper body, I'm not entirely sure exactly where the injury was either, but I know it was upper body. I was told right as the second half was getting started that he was questionable to return. Clearly he did. But I think it would have been worse, no matter how bad this half did go, if they're doing the back and forth thing and trying to trade series. And so I think you could still see both these guys over the course of the season, but I feel like if you're going to, you've got to give guys like proper stretches of time in the game. You can't do a thing where you're doing a timeshare, because I've yet to see any circumstance where that really works.
I 100% agree. And I guess my only issue with them going back to Finley was in the first half, you had an extremely dynamic arm. I even had a friend comment to me about how, he was like, David, this guy's throwing to like guys who are open before, like receivers aren't even getting open when he's letting these balls go. And I'm like, oh, is this your first time experiencing a quarterback who can throw with anticipation? It's a wonderful thing when you can actually find it. And that's absolutely the case. Like Finley was throwing guys open. It wasn't a matter of, guys are just, 10 yards clear of a receiver. No, I mean, Finley was really, you could tell that he knew the playbook. He knew, kind of where guys wanted to be in space and where they were supposed to be. And so my only thing about the second half and the comment that I made, privately to us was just, it was clear that quarterback, to me anyway, it was clear that quarterback wasn't there in the second half. And at the time when the game was still relatively in the balance, I know that Georgia State didn't score in the second half, so
it was in the balance until the pick six, or really, maybe till the drive before that. With the 4th and 19, the turnover on downs, that was really where they were out of real chances, because
correct. And
they got the ball back, but there was basically no time to score twice, and you'd have to get a 2-point conversion. But
right. And that specifically, that drive is when I would have made the change, because it just felt like you kind of took the air out of your own ball, in a way. And it's I only say this not because of I only say this because of the injury, I don't want to sit here and try to start a quarterback controversy, because I'm not. And I know that the rap was put on his non-throwing arm, so maybe the coaching staff made a decision where they were like, okay, well, he can still throw, it's not it never looked like the issue was his right arm. And I think that's totally fair. I legitimately think that is totally fair if that was the decision that they made. Memphis's defensive line, I mean, to slightly pivot, I don't care who you had back there. I thought Georgia State's offensive line had a very bad day. And I think it was a little bit frustrating for me, just listening to the broadcast, because they kept talking up like, oh, Georgia State made all these changes on the offensive line, and, oh, this year the offensive line is going to be better than last year. And like, yeah, that's still possible, but like, you're saying this while neither quarterback in the second half is having a ton of time to do anything, and they're constantly shifting the pocket and having guys have to be moved off. I mean, one of the sacks that Finley took, you had like I don't even think it was a defensive end. I want to say it was a linebacker. I'd have to go back and watch it. But, the right guard, I think it was a tight end, or the running back. Sorry. Yeah. The running back comes across to try to chip, gets completely blown up. And while Finley is moving forwards, to throw the ball in that direction, the guy is basically being tackled into his running back and himself. It's just stuff like that. There's not an offense that is going to be able to pass the ball effectively when you just give the quarterback no time. And I credit Memphis, certainly. It felt like they had more than 3 sacks, honestly. I know they had 10 TFLs?
10 TFLs and then 5 quarterback hurries in addition. So that's a cornucopia of plays where they affected in a very positive way. A couple of times they just straight up killed a Georgia State drive with one of those plays. Yeah. And then some penalties mixed in there as well. The last thing I wanted to do, work in some audio from Dell McGee's press conference on the topic of the quarterbacks, because if you were out there saying, I don't know, I think I would have stuck with Cameron Brown if it was me, kind of sounded like Dell McGee had the same thought. To set this up, because my audio will be less good at the start because I'm further away from the mic, because I put it right on Coach McGee's podium. I'm asking about whether there is any consideration to have played Cam in the second half, and this is what Dell McGee's answer was. Any consideration going back to Cam in the second half after he had kind of had a spark there coming in for DJ?
Oh yeah, I absolutely we should have went back to Cam, in my opinion. But we made some decisions, and we let TJ kind of finished it out. But he definitely gave us a spark, which I thought we would get with him in the game. His injury kind of set him back a little bit. I think from a mental standpoint, it set him back too. So that's when we should have readjusted and really thought about putting Cam back in the game. I thought Cam did some really good things at quarterback. His mobility was really good for escaping some of their pressures that they were having, and TJ is a little bit less mobile than Cam. So these are things that we got to go back and address as a coaching staff and make sure we get all on the same page and come in agreement with what we're doing.
If you'll allow me, like so I hadn't heard the post game yet, and I want to personally say that changes everything that I said last night about, you know, it felt in the moment like a coaching staff that didn't have, I don't want to say control of the team, but, you know, like feel for a game, if that makes sense. You know, like there's a thing with coaching where you got to feel for your players. You got to feel for situations. And I think the fact that he at least thought about it and says it here means that it's not a matter of he doesn't have feel. So I do want to say, you know, obviously I didn't broadcast what I say or anything like that, but that definitely does change my opinion on that comment that I made last night.
I will say the concern here is that it's all well good saying it during post game, but if you've got that feeling and you aren't pulling the trigger, and it's not the first time we've heard Dell say after a game something like, we should have done this or should have done that, and not to be all like, my brother in Christ, you're the head coach, but like, that is ultimately his call. And there was another thing I'm going to pull up now related to that. I had asked him a question about, well, as I accidentally played the other one. Asked him about the collaboration process, just kind of how he approaches, if he's got something in mind, like I want to run the ball more, like he talked about he wished they didn't abandon the run, and another thing that if he was on the headset he could have said something about and they could have started doing it, kind of his answer on how he views the collaboration process with his coaches, when he wants to overrule them versus letting them handle all of that, even if at the end of the day he has an answer like, I wish we had done this differently.
You've spoken about shouldn't have abandoned the run, stuff like that, and I guess where is the collaboration? What's the balance between you wanting to make those calls in games versus deferring to your coordinators to run those sides of the ball themselves?
I try to allow that to happen without coloring the coordinator's mind. So I try to ease off, and there's certain things that I will ask for during the series, and that's kind of the collaboration. But I don't want to be the coach that's going to interfere with those things unless I see fit where I have to move in and make those decisions. But I have confidence in our staff. It was more so what Memphis was doing and the lack of execution on our part, too. So we just got to do better.
Any consideration?
Trying this, ended up playing a couple of those excerpts over again, but I thought that was the most interesting answer maybe he's ever given at a press conference, because I thought it was very illuminating, and maybe not in the best way, because like the fact is, I don't think that this team is going to reach the potential that he wants it to as head coach if he is not asserting himself in those moments. And if he has a feeling on the sideline, he's got to say, we need to go back to Cam, or we need to run the ball more. And I kind of thought when he made the hires, when he has Jim Chaney as his offensive coordinator last year and when it's Hugh Jackson this year, that he had guys that he would trust could just kind of handle it, but that wouldn't get an ego about it if he came in and overruled them and like understood. And I've kind of gotten the vibe that when we spoke to Hugh Jackson during this fall camp, he seemed very like, I just want to do what Coach McGee wants to do. Like, he didn't seem like he was approaching this from any kind of ego way. And so it's like, I think you're only negging yourself as a head coach if you're not letting this be the full volume of what the program you want it to be, those type of decisions. And I think he kind of has to. And so this is his second year as a head coach. There's a learning process here. You can certainly get to the point where you are through those kind of growing pains and you feel a lot more comfortable in the moment, kind of switching over the offensive coach's headset and just saying, it's Cam time, or go over on the sideline, because I believe both coordinators at least this game, we're on the sideline and have a conversation. But I get that he has a lot on his plate, and it's smart in most cases to not stage manage his coordinators. But when he's got these comments post-game and he's talking about, like, I wish we'd done this, I think he's got to start doing more to make that happen. Or you're going to have these situations keep cropping up. And you knew what you were getting when you hired a first-time head coach. And I think you like a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff, clearly with the job that he's done recruiting and assembling a bigger staff that had been here before, counting all the off-field people. It seems like that side of things he's got pretty down pat, and you like the growth that you've seen there. But the in-game stuff is still lacking, and it feels just like it's an option he hasn't really taken yet, that I feel like it will be to his benefit to finally do. And that kind of gels in with the special teams stuff. I don't know what's going on.
It has not looked, not only has it not been what we wanted, but I feel like the last time it was this negative was in like 2021 or 2022. It's been an issue. Like this is not a 22-point loss if you have neutral special teams. Special teams was awful yesterday.
Yeah, so I guess the big ticket ones, you go 0 for 2 on field goals. Braden McAllister misses a 51-yarder on the opening drive. I think the loss there is that you had to settle for a really long field goal because that drive had started off really well. College kickers, 51 is by no means automatic. But later you get a 52-yard catch for true freshman Grant Hollier. I think the longest play of the game from scrimmage for Georgia State. Set you up in really good primo territory. You end up having to settle for a 42-yarder from Liam Rickman, and he misses that one. Sounds like McAllister has got the job moving forward now, I think, because he kicked the last extra point, and Dell said after that was going to be the case, that Braden was going to get the next chance at being kicker. But that stuff is almost like the most removed from coaching, because it's like Dell McGee is not involved in the coaching technique. And I think even the special teams coordinator, like, there's someone whose job it is to work through the specialists, but that is just ultimately like you've got to get better play there. And maybe the mistake is you didn't add someone in the portal, but I mean, at this point, I don't want to dog on the kid, but Liam Rickman's a third-year kicker who I don't think you have any trust in. And like the one value you have from having a guy back here for 3 straight seasons is you want some reliability there. And it's not consistent, and it took points off the board. The 42-yarder was real. It took the wind out of your sails because it was after a really big play. It would have been better to get a touchdown because you'd be making a 1-score lead, a bigger 1-score lead, but it would have kept positive momentum going. And the way the rest of the half played out, you would have been up at the half, even if Memphis does hit their field goal, which if we want to progress to that next stage, it's a 60-yard attempt on the final play. I was honestly shocked Memphis wasn't just going to try a Hail Mary on the last play. They're down 14-16. 16-14. But they trot out their kicker, Johnny Spedick, for a 60-yarder. There is a 5-yard penalty on Georgia State for disconcerting signals, delay of game. It's been a real point of emphasis this year where if you're the defense or special teams and you like suddenly move towards the line to try and get a team, the offense jump, false start, or if you clap or do some kind of thing to mimic signals, it's going to be flagged. And I just don't really know why Josiah Robinson is even worried. Like, after the game, Dell mentioned it as like he was trying to get the defensive line to shift. But it's like, it's such a low percentage kick. Maybe because it's such a far kick out, you think you have a chance of blocking it, but just let the snap happen. Like, I feel like that's a situation where it was a guy pressing, trying to do too much, trying to take leadership on the special teams unit, but I just don't know what it was for. And it ends up costing you because 55 is still a massive distance, but he had the leg for it. He crushed it. And I don't know how much of a difference it is with it being a 16-14 lead versus being down 17-16. You're still going to have to get a stop out of the break, which they weren't able to do, and then it's an 8-point lead for Memphis, and then the rest of the game progresses as it does. I just feel like it was another moment where just sloppiness creeped in. And then in the third quarter, there's the 35-yard punt return to midfield for Sutton Smith, where it was a good kick, and I don't think Reed Shandy really outkicked his coverage. He just kind of boomed it, and the guy was there, had a chance to make a play. and just missed tackle, and that springs them for a 35-yard return. And
the first missed tackle would have been a negative play.
Yeah,
and
he was right there, just didn't make the play.
Yeah, and it was it wasn't like I saw an arm bar at some point in the game, which, you don't do those. I think it was a Memphis player too, so it's not like Georgia State was doing that. But if that tackle is made right there, then we're not talking as severely about special teams being an issue. But when that one tackle missed, it just led to a chain of events where, the returner just got continually freer and freer, and it turned into a big play.
So, and the people we're talking about, I don't remember who it was on the missed tackle. That's not trying to avoid I just don't remember who it was. I didn't see it live, the number, and I haven't had a chance to watch it back yet. But Josiah Robinson's the penalty on the disconcerting signals. He's been playing vets. Last week it was Leo Blackburn on the fair catch interference. Starter Bernard Kazi, I think, got the post-play special teams penalty on one of the punt returns. This is not like he is putting freshmen... last year on the long punt return, Texas State had Austin McGee was a gunner and played it really poorly, and they gave up an 80-yard return because of that. This wasn't that. He's been asking his senior players to be on these units. He has emphasized it. He wants them to do it partially because he wants to put his best players out there, but also he knows it will give them value if they want to be a pro, that you've got to be able to play special teams unless you were the star of a team, and something he talked about this fall. But these are the guys that are making these mistakes, and it's just kind of the question of how can you correct this? And I think it goes back to, again, him taking more control of it. Because it's I've been around some practices, they do special team stuff, and he's running every practice. He's on the microphone. But when it gets to those moments with special teams, does he need to be more hands-on? Does he need to be less? Does he need to tell the guys to back off because maybe players are thinking too much and need to just kind of cut loose and not worry about every little details are getting to them, but maybe the way to fix that is to stop worrying about them as much, because maybe they're pressing a little bit. I don't know. There's a lot to figure out there, but this is another game that, I know it seems crazy to be talking about little things in a 22-point loss, but one, it was really a 15-point loss, and two, it really felt like that handful of plays flips and it can be a different outcome. That is how football is, even in a game that ultimately ends up a 38-16 loss. They weren't really that far away, and in a lot of ways it felt like a Trent Miles era loss. We saw a few of these where you look at yardage, they didn't get beat that badly. In this game they'll only get out yarded by 12. It was just the tale of two halves there. Special teams, obviously, issues were a flavor of that coaching staff as well. And I think the one difference here that you can hope for if you're a Georgia State fan is, like I mentioned earlier, this is Dell McGee's second year. He is still growing as a head coach, and certainly there's things that he can continue to change in how he approaches it. At the end of Trent Miles being at Georgia State, he had been a head coach for a decade, counting his time at Indiana State. And so it was a bit of this isn't really going to change here. But as I measure this one up, I kind of don't feel that bad about it, particularly relating it to how they kind of just collapsed in the second half. Because I think this is a good Memphis team, and I think game script and the margins got away from you, and that's why you lost this game. But that is, in theory, more correctable than just you were blowing off the ball for 4 quarters. You were not in the same league as them. They had a lead for a lot of the first half. They were hanging. They just couldn't...
Scored second, too. They... had the opportunity. Not only did they have the lead, but they kind of, for lack of a better phrase, took it to Memphis to get that lead, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and they were doing what Memphis ended up doing in the second half, just controlling the clock, and until they went away from the run, it was pretty balanced. Or you factor in some of the quarterback runs that weren't designed, but you were getting yardage both ways, and then really leaning on the passing game. And the other thing you look at is you've now had a near 200 rushing yard performance and a 340 passing yard performance. It was 2 separate games, and the other side of the offense was negligible enough that it cost you. You need to figure out how to have that be more complementary, but you've seen each facet of the offense work in each of these 2 weeks. It just hasn't been complementary, and it's been bad in the red zone. You didn't make the red zone against you made the red zone once against Ole Miss, miss a field goal. You go 0 for 2 on red zone trips, any points at all in this game. And you look at the other side, opponents have scored on, I believe, 10 of 11 red zone trips against Georgia State this year. So some of that will come out in the wash, especially as you don't play like 2 top 40 SP plus teams the rest of the way. But it doesn't necessarily. Like, you still have to fix those things. It's not just as simple as like, you won't play Ole Miss and Memphis every week, because one, level of competition doesn't drop that much. And even if it does, you could lose to any team the rest of the way. Marshall's also 0-2. They lose to transitional team Missouri State this past Saturday at home in Huntington. You will lose a game to them this year if the same special teams stuff, all the stuff on the margins keeps being poor. Like, it's good in a way that that's what your problem is, because if you can fix it and you can just start to play more cohesively both sides of the ball together, I think you can hang in a lot of the games left on the schedule. But if you don't, you're going to be in a lot of those games, and you're going to keep losing a lot of these, even if you look at it, it's like, Georgia State outgained their opponent by 100 but lost this game. Or it's another one like this where they were narrowly outgained but certainly in the contest for most of the 60 minutes. The problems won't go away. So this ultimately is not like giving Dell McGee a pass. It's more like you've got the rest of the season to see how they can progress in these areas, because it's going to keep holding this team back if they don't get fixed. And that ultimately is going to rest on this coaching staff.
Yeah, absolutely. The only way to get past being, as poor on the margins as Georgia State has been, kind of these last 2 years, is just an overwhelming talent gap. And I don't think Georgia State has that right now. This was not a 22-point talent gap type game. And, even if you take away the pick six, which, just if you look at those types of throws, like that's the high risk of those types of throws. If you miss it at all, congrats, you threw a touchdown to the other team. So even if you say that this was a 15-point game, I don't think that if you take the entire game on its face, I don't think that Memphis was 15 points better than Georgia State, despite them having a 15-point lead for a good bit of the second half. It's just Georgia State has to clean up the stuff on the margins. The penalties, it's an issue. Like you said, the lack of the head coach taking control, that can be an issue. It was a problem. I'm not sure that this week is going to be the week that we specifically get back to what we would want out of a Georgia State, but it's a good opportunity for them to have a lower stakes environment and kind of iron out some of those, kinks that they have clearly developed in their, process.
More to come. Like I say, I think we will still have more to say on this game when we get to recording for the main podcast, getting ready for the Murray State game this Saturday, but I think we'll wrap it up there as we approach 38 minutes on this podcast. Thank you for listening. Any feedback on the format, if you like seeing the stats on screen, if there's anything else you want to see, if the audio all works, certainly we appreciate that, because I think we want to make this the most interactive, informative post-game show possible. But that'll do it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you later this week previewing Murray State.